Welcome to the Manchester Local Offer Podcast. In each episode, we'll bring you the latest news about local SEND services, interviews with people sharing their experiences, and highlight resources you may have missed. And we're back for another episode. And I'm here with Caprice, who is a super creative graphic designer from SENCode.
And I'm joined by a sit-down comedian and editor of this podcast, Beck.
Today, we had the opportunity to get Sean McKendrick on the podcast. He is the Strategic Director of Children's and Education Services. We asked him lots of questions. Some of these were provided by the Changemakers group, and he also shared some stories. So let's get straight into the interview where me and Caprice grilled him for about 30 minutes. I'm Beck, and I'm here with the Local Offer Podcast, and I work with SENCode as a marketer.
I'm Caprice. I'm a graphic designer at SENCode and work heavily with accessibility to do with online digital wise.
Morning, I'm Sean McKendrick. I'm the Director of Children's and Education Services with the City Council.
Wonderful. Before we start with formal questions that are, let's be honest, quite heavy. We want answers, or the people that have wrote these questions want answers from the Changemakers. So do you have any fun facts about yourself? Because the only thing we could find is that you've worked in social work for 30 years.
Yeah, well, fun facts. Probably worked in social work for more than 30 years, which is something I probably hide, mainly because I tried to kid on I'm much younger than what I actually am. It's probably nearer 40 years. Fun facts, I'm not really sure if it qualifies as a fun fact, but I'm an absolute avid fan of Celtic Football Club. So I kind of...
No mentions of Rangers, Caprice. That's
Caprice.
I know nothing about football.
Oh, and Eunice, thank goodness for that. It might have been the shortest podcast ever in relation to that. So I don't think it's funny, although it can be quite excruciating at times following Celtic, particularly when we play in Europe. But just to take your invitation to have a knock at Rangers, it's very funny when we beat them, and we beat them very regularly. So yeah. I did have one, just what I'm thinking when I was thinking about that, I did have one footballing funny story, right? So as a kid, and even as an adult, even as an older adult, I loved playing football. And I remember one occasion that my mum didn't let me go out because I had the cold. And I hope people are not eating their dinner listening to this, but I stuck a bit of handkerchief up my nose. And I was running around, played football, forgot that the piece of handkerchief was there, got involved in a tackle, and somebody knocked the piece of handkerchief out my nose. I completely forgot I had it up there in the first place, and I thought I broke my nose. And I thought I broke my nose for at least 5 or 6 hours because this thing popped out my nose. And that is the truth. And I managed to convince my mum that I broke my nose as well. I can't now remember, because it was several years ago, can't now remember how it ended. Possibly I had a flashback memory of, I stuck that up my nose. But yeah, that's my both stupidity and affiliation to football kind of managed in the one story.
Can you help young people who are wheelchair users able to be more independent in Manchester?
It's a really good question. So my hesitation was about recognising my role and my responsibilities in relation to this. So if I kind of clarify what I mean by that. So the Director of Children's Services has got a legal responsibility to look out for all the needs of the residents in a particular area. So for mine, it's Manchester. But they don't always have all the levers and all the things to deal with the issues that children and young people have. So partly the job is ensuring that you're making the right connections with the right people. So my hesitation was a wee bit about, well, is that really the question for me entirely? So I think I've kind of got the answer now that I've given you that preamble. So firstly, I think I've got a job to influence others to make that more accessible. So for example, TFGM being a really good provider of transport, and clearly the accessibility of transport will obviously be an issue. So ensuring that your voices are heard in that discussion is my job, rather than me refit a bus in a certain style. So ensuring that your voices are heard. And that's principally through the SEND board, where we would have connections and influence individuals. Where the direct answer to your question about what can I do about it, it's probably more about what can Maria and her team do about it, which is, what's the local offer? What does that look like? How are we ensuring that the local offer is promoting accessibility, and in this instance for wheelchair users? And how does things like accessibility, and my terminology about accessibility, about kind of transport and education and inclusion, how's that send offer, that local offer, doing that job? So in summary, I think I've got two answers to the question, is that I've got a bit of influence with those that might do more about physical accessibility, and TFGM are the ones I've got in my head because I've got an example of that being successful, and I'll give you that in a second. And then the second thing is making sure that people that we employ, whose job is to support children with special education needs and disability, that offer is as broad, as purposeful, and as effective as it possibly can be. So it might not be an absolute direct answer to your question, but I want to go back to one of the examples I did give. So I've got responsibilities across GM for our care leavers. So I got this role across Greater Manchester doing some work on behalf of their care leavers. And because of their adversities, we wanted to give them really good opportunities for employment, seeing their family members, etc., etc. So they did have free transport under the mayor up until they were aged 21. It took me 2.5 years almost to get them free bus transport from the age of 21 to 25. So when we've got voices, because some of that was about a care leavers lobbying individuals, and we've got people who've got influence coming together, you can actually make a change. So if there is something around the accessibility thing that we need to do more of, and hopefully I'll be able to cover this later on, then you need to tell us, because this job is not about me rocking up here or at other places and telling you what we're going to do. I think the job needs to be about giving empowerment and voice for people to tell us what they need. And then I'll work out either how we do it, or work out whether we're able to do it for finance, etc., etc., etc. So hopefully that gives a bit of response to that question.
It seems like a communication is like obviously the thing. If someone tells you this is a good idea or this might help, you would take that on board.
Yeah, I mean, I can't give commitment beyond listening and trying to give voice and delivery to it. Because you need to think about money, you need to think about resources, you need to think about doability in relation to it as well. But we're quite passionate, and I think we have been for a couple of years, around about people telling us, because I'm not an expert in everybody's lived circumstances. I've got some insight, but I'm not an expert in it. And certainly in this leadership role, the job that I've got is to make sure that people's voices are heard, but also be realistic rather than promise people the earth and knowing that you're not able to deliver it. So having that communication and relationship with people that says, do you know what, I can do this, but by the way, I just can't do this, and this is the reasons why. Sometimes explain to people is the issue.
How can we make it easier for disabled people to get jobs?
So bringing people jobs, bringing people income is an absolute, ambition for the council. Me personally, I know what it does to you. I came from a fairly poor part of Glasgow. I understand what unemployment and not fair access to the employment world actually means to people, and I know what impact it can have. So I suppose there's probably a couple of things in my mind in relation to it. And I've probably got a trend in the way that I answer these things, is to give you something national and then give you something local. So there is a bit about the City Council's inclusion strategy, protected characteristics. There is a bit about business developing their understanding about disabled individuals in whatever way we wish to describe that, and the openness of the kind of employment market. So there's a lot of pushing at that arena in relation to it. I think our growth and development people, they do a lot of that work that I don't see in many respects. So bringing kind of equal opportunities to employment is a big thing for the council. Let's just put it that way. I was trying a more fancier word than thing, but it's a priority for the council. Maybe that's a better word than thing. But I suppose for us in children's social care, it is really about maximising the potential of internships and looking at growing services like this and approaches like this that do better than what I remember for disabled children when I was growing up, where it was very stereotypical, very protected work. The important part is not just employment and money, it's also about worth, it's also about social connection. So we do internships in the council. Last time I looked, we had about 100 or so, where people got the opportunity to real life work as well as study. And we probably need to do more of them. We probably need to do more of loads of things, to be perfectly honest with you. But in terms of work, the experience of having real life work experiences and all the challenges that brings, plus an opportunity to study, seems to me to be an ideal way that you have the reality of work experience, plus you're able to kind of continue your academic study. So internships is a really good thing, as well as what I said about how we push employers' perspective about how they include folk with disabilities in whatever way we describe those disabilities. So a bit of a double answer, if you like.
That is definitely a double answer, because that definitely went on to the next question. So I don't think that's really. Here's about where you grew up, and I think you answered that already with the parallels of how you can help people in Manchester, or if you understand what they're facing. So
Yeah.
that's already answered.
Well, it's interesting. Do you mind if I just expand upon that? Because I've been a bit of a studier I've been living here for nearly 9 years. And for a whole number of other years, I lived in Glasgow. I referred back earlier on about the embarrassment of telling people how old you are. Anyway, it's a small thing that I've got. The cities are very similar, actually, in terms of their prosperity. Let's just talk about the positives. In terms of their inclusiveness, in terms of their multicultural aspects. Certainly Manchester is much more multicultural than Glasgow, but it has a multicultural aspect to it. But the poverty and challenges and how poverty impacts on people's lives is unfortunately a common characteristic between the two cities. So if you were asking me, because I can see the questions now, if you were asking me, how did you know the needs of Manchester's children? Well, when I first came, I probably didn't know, other than the experience of working for many years with vulnerable children in Glasgow. However, I probably know quite a lot now about children in Manchester, and probably could do a bit of a mastermind, although I'm now annoyed at myself I've mentioned that word, because I might get some mastermind type questions about population and age ranges, but yeah, I probably know it fairly well. But what I would say, the experiences are probably transcends the kind of Manchester and Glasgow boundaries, because they are very, very similar cities.
Because growing up in Glasgow, how was it for young people in Glasgow, particularly either disabled or none, compared to Manchester? Have you seen anything that really stands out?
Probably not a lot of difference, to be perfectly honest. I think I kind of made the reference to poverty. I'd probably add about that to kind of mental health or mental well-being related matters as well. And that kind of drives a whole range of social problems that we'll deal with in Glasgow and in Manchester. Sadly, I think the heroin addiction in Glasgow is almost at a unique level in relation to how pervasive that is amongst certain parents and young people in relation to it. So I think that's probably distinctly different. But in relation to your podcast and disabled children and young people, I think the issues would be exactly the same around place in society, inclusion, education, opportunities, anxieties about future life, income. I think they'd all be the same. Because irrespective of the 247 miles, you can tell that I've travelled this quite a bit between our cities, those factors are the same. And if those factors are the same, they are likely to impact on most people, but certainly people who've got adversities as well. It'll have that kind of similar impact, and it'll have the similar sense of frustration around how people with disabilities are viewed as well. So I think that will be very similar.
Obviously, you're mentioning getting them into like education and supporting young people, but how can we do that? How can we support those young people, disabled young people, into education with the transport, with basically any sector that would improve someone's life, I guess.
I'm going to repeat the kind of national part about what's happening nationally, because my job's a lot about developing policy in the city and influencing how we deliver that policy. So there's maybe something just to be said around about the current government and how they're trying to make education more inclusive across all forms of disability. And we'll wait to see how that goes in due course, but there's currently a bill going through Parliament, and certainly the professional community and teachers are thinking about how we make schools more inclusive. So that's a national policy part of it. There's a debate along school leaders around how is it you do that? What is it we might try in relation to that? So we've now got nearly 10,000 education, health and care plans in the city. And we're really trying to think hard around how is it we answer that question about inclusivity. So for social and emotional and behavioural challenges, we're looking at schools, because we've got a falling role early on, kind of reception in year 1 and 2. We're looking at redrawing their buildings to have SEND-related schools within the mainstream primary school. So you don't get that exclusion that you can kind of, you may well have experienced yourself. So that part about you go to the same school as the person up the road, your parent caregiver drops in at that school because it's, in most instances, pretty local. You're part of that community, you're visible in that community, and you are not bussed away somewhere else. So that's a really important thing for us as a council, that you actually think pragmatically, but you also think about the values of people being included and staying and being educated where they are. So I think there is something about that, and certainly I've had a commitment, and we've had a lot of thinking around about keeping children in school, whether they're disabled or not, or whether they have other challenges around them. And certainly 3 weeks ago, forgive me about the dated part of the data, we didn't have any exclusions from our schools in this academic term. So I think school leaders know the value of people in school and being included in school. And I include disabled children and children who've got other forms of disability within that as well. And we've got some positive results about that. But I'd keep a watch, if I'm giving anybody advice, I'd keep a watch on that bill going through. And I'd certainly be recommending to any of your listeners to be talking to people like me around how is it you're going to kind of make sure that that bill becomes practicable. How is it you're implementing it? Because the one thing I want to get away from this as I was walking to the messages is that it's not the adults in the world that we need to be listening to, because they've got limited experience, they might have a bit of insight and they've got a professional knowledge. But we need to be listening to young people. So you need to be asking us questions and making demands of people in, using inverted commas here, power and influence.
Well, I think, obviously, what you mentioned about that bill, I was just going to bring it up anyway, because I went to a special school, so I was excluded. I met some great people, don't get me wrong, but I feel like the way it's changing now, or when I've been speaking to people that are in education now, it's kind of changed where you go in a mainstream school and there's just provisions there. That wasn't there, so that I had probably the ability to do a higher level in all subjects, really, but they didn't have the resources because they only catered to one level below. But I think if you put them all together, one, you learn how to socialize. I didn't learn how to socialize properly with people that weren't disabled for many years, and when I did, I realized, oh, this world's great, but you kind of sheltered if you're stuck in like an environment where you're surrounded by people with chairs. And don't get me wrong, it was probably great for certain aspects, but my school was both a primary and a high school, but both SEND, so you never really got any, like, until like these guys came in and kind of out of luck kind of noticed something and was like, yeah, you need to be kind of taken out of it. And they eventually did do that, didn't you? It took me one day a week to kind of do some work experience, and if they didn't do that, I don't know where I'd have ended up, but probably not doing anything productive like this. So I think you are right of getting a bill passed that keeps, everyone included, and I think mixing as well, mixing of people that aren't disabled with children that are disabled, because that teaches them to get along with people with disabilities. Because you realize when you go out into the world, like, how many people like stare at you and do all that things, and you get used to it. But if I was mixed with people that, and I found that when I was in college, you were mixed with people that are doing that, and they're treating you like this. I had one person kick me, I had another person do this, whatever. Um, but I might have been better suited of dealing with that if I was already mixed with people, and then I'd just been like, oh, that guy's just an idiot, instead of just being like, all these people that can walk are crazy, right? Instead of being like that, so if they, and I think it will help learning environments instead of just being like, because there's so many ranges of, sorry, I've gone on for ages, but there's so many ranges of disabilities in that school, of like, from people that have no, I don't know the right word, no mental disabilities, and then they had people that needed communication devices and I might have had some mental impairments or struggles with their learning difficulties. So you kind of only got like a mix of that. There was no like do GCSEs. It was like a couple of levels for each of the students. The classes weren't like tailored enough. So I don't feel like I got a full learning experience, and I feel like that's held me back when I went into actual mainstream education. So I think it's good that you're trying to get this built past.
I had the complete opposite experience to Beck because I went to a mainstream school, and I had a lot of ignorance towards disabled people, which is really weird to say as a disabled person myself. I didn't grow up around disabled people though, so I didn't know being disabled myself was a big deal. I didn't know how to cope, and I was surrounded by people who didn't understand it. So we had very switched things. I grew up in Malta, so no disabled people were in Malta. Like, it's not accessible. So I never grew up around disabled people. And then when I moved to England and then ended up becoming disabled, it was a big thing of like, I don't know how to adapt. And my school didn't help me at all until college, like you said. And that's when I started feeling independent and comfortable with my disability. And now I surround myself around different types of people and do this now. So it's important to me now. And it's really interesting that, like, coming from two separate backgrounds, a full SEND school and a mainstream school, to combine them would be fantastic. Because again, I wouldn't have had ignorance, and then Beck wouldn't have had the issues of not knowing how to interact with able-bodied people. It's quite interesting how schools are. And hopefully it can be combined. That sounds like a fantastic idea. And hopefully more schools adapt to that. That would be nice. Well, yeah, listening to people's, because you talked about listening to people's voices and having them be heard, young people especially. How do you access, like, how do you talk to young people? How do you get their voices heard,
Yeah. So just before I answer that question, I mean, I guess it's one of the things that you'd be ingrained in you as a social worker and most other people, but I'm just talking for my professional. So everybody's got a different story. Everybody's got different experiences, and to describe people, children with disability, is a nonsense because of their own experiences of that and the circumstances that create those experiences. So I can say none of our staff would treat people like a homogenous group of individuals. Everybody's got their own individual stories. We've all got our individual stories. You've had some dreadful insight of a hanky up my nose at some point in relation to this. So going back to your question, quite easy actually. it's quite an interesting experience. So when I first came down here, one of the government policies was a catchphrase called "the child's voice," and I spent a lifetime listening to children's voices, but actually working out as an adult what was best to protect them. So sometimes their voice was not well heard in that space. So coming down here, and about 3 years ago, we lodged our ambition for a UNICEF child-friendly city, and we spoke to 11,000 children. Yeah, quite a lot of children, by the way. We've got a population of 135, so we managed to cover quite a bit of those young people. And basically, we asked them, what is it you want? More or less, a very simple question. And I think sometimes in positions of, inverted commas, influence and power, you forget the simplicity because you kind of deal in loads of complexity. So what is it you want was the question that we asked in 2022. In December, we will hopefully, when we speak to UNICEF, get a child-friendly accreditation as a child-friendly city. So I tell you that story because I think it's a potential success depending on December. But I tell you the story because it was dead easy to talk to 11,000 children. So I went out to 3 primary schools. All our senior staff went out to it. We've got over 1,000 staff currently trained in children's rights. So knowing the power of their voice, knowing the legal influence that children have. And they're not just social workers. They're a whole kind of multi-professional layer of people in the council and their partners. I'll get the figure wrong, and it might be worth a fact check after this, but something like 80% of our schools are rights respecting schools. So you try and build a bit of a culture that says it's not just the right thing to do to listen to children's voices, it's to try and make sure that you've got avenues and you've got means of accountability. Because I could listen to yours all day long, I could walk out the door and do nothing about it. So the UN part of a child-friendly city, we've made certain commitments to children and young people because we were told to, and we're evidencing how we're doing that. So that's one example of how voices are heard. And similarly in relation to children's rights, just growing people's confidence as children and young people, you've got a voice in society. There might be older people here that have got more of a voice, but you've got a voice too. We'll do loads of things, like we've got a youth council in relation to this, we've got youth forums, we've got youth centres. But I'm going to end in the one example I've got flicking through my mind is going back to the bit about our care leavers group. So every local authority in the country is meant to have what's called a corporate parenting board. And if you've ever been in boards, they're usually quite boring, where there's loads of papers going around, loads of discussions, it's quite abstract, there's not a lot of work producing at that particular meeting, usually falls out that meeting and people do all the work. But we employed what we call our care consultants, and they come to that board and they've became, and I say this respectfully, agitators, and I think that that's exactly what they should be. And they've agitated loads of changes in terms of the services that we provide for care leavers, and they've had loads of successes because we've given them a position where they can influence. And that is about not just listening, because I think we're pretty good at listening. It's actually doing something about it that's probably more important. So there's a whole range of activities that we'll do, including, to a degree, because Maria's here, the local offer, because yes, that's about advice and giving, but it's also about hearing people's experiences and revamping things and changing things as well. So there's a whole set of avenues. But I'm going to conclude in this question with a kind of part of my response and part of the job that I do. You try and put those structures in to facilitate voice. But there's a challenge there about how many voices want to come forward. So I'd certainly, despite people will give me a run for their money with their questions and make me scratch my head, and sometimes I need to say no to them, I'm certainly encouraging as many children and young people to come forward in groups or individuals to actually make more demand. We'll work out whether or not we can supply that demand, but if they're not heard, what you've got is you've got adults making decisions for children. That isn't always the best.
Wonderful. So I'm aware we've only got a brief amount of time, so there's two questions on here that I'm thinking to ask. One of them is just, do you have any questions for us? Just because I thought maybe you might have some questions for us. The other one is, if you could achieve one big change for children and young people in Manchester over the next few years, what would it be?
You just kept two difficult questions to the end. They're really difficult questions. Inevitably when I was walking here, I was thinking, what questions am I going to ask? Well, I'm going to ask that question. I didn't expect to get asked the question of what questions have you got of us, actually, to be perfectly honest. So I might duck that, or I might answer the first one and then something jump into my brain to get to that. What would we like? So this UNICEF child-friendly city is a big thing for us. There are only 4 or 5, that's worth a fact check after this podcast, there are only 4 or 5 across the UK that have actually achieved that status. There are more cities interested in it. And we want to be given that accolade because, personally speaking, I want to be tested about the commitments that we've made. So we've made a commitment about children feeling more safe, children having greater access to parks, children having, for this audience, more access to inclusion opportunities. So we've made a host of commitments, and because they are influenced by the 11,000 children that we've heard, I want us to get that status, but I want, more importantly, now to begin to think about who challenges us, about how we deliver that status. So yes, I would like Celtic to win the Champions League is a big answer to your question about what you'd like over the next couple of years. Yes, I'd like us all to drag us out of poverty, but what's in my control, which is also in inverted commas, what I'm able to influence is that part about the accountability as to what we said we would deliver as part of the kind of child-friendly city.
Yeah.
And yeah, I did think about a question for you, because you've asked me some really good ones that I've had to think quite hard about. And it's probably in two parts in many respects, which is, what are we not doing that's bleedingly obvious to you that might not be bleedingly obvious to me? That's one part of it. And how do you think you might get more voices that's going to ask some questions of us?
Ooh, that is a tough one. First of all, I'd say, so I've had an experience with this, but I also had a friend he got a petition going and it got over 100,000 signatures. And in schools, so in my college, for example, there's only one evac chair, right? There was a fire alarm that went off. It was on the 3rd floor, and we were all on the 2nd floor. No one's allowed to go up the floor. The person who was trained on the evac chair, how to use it, was off sick. So what do I do? Do I stay in a burning that could potentially be building? Burning? If the building's building itself, that would be impressive, wouldn't it? A building that's burning. But no, I just jumped down. Luckily for me, I jumped out of my chair, crawled down, got one of the teachers to carry my chair, and I did that in about 2 minutes, quicker than you could probably get an evac chair, to be fair. I wasn't told about any safety procedures when I went to this college about these fire doors, all this kind of stuff. So when I went in on Monday morning after they let everyone go home, because I don't know if it was a general fire or whatever, or just a test, but they just said, right, off you go. Came in, fire warden comes and he says, oh, you can't be doing that. I'm like, what? He's like, you can't be jumping out your chair. And I'm like, there's a fire. I'm not burning alive. No one told me what to do. So he's just like, you can't do that. And then this friend of mine ended up, I don't know, having a similar issue where he ended up stuck in the building because of the evac chair situation. He started a petition. It's got over 100,000 signatures. So I think he's trying to get more people trained in evac training and things like that. So I think safety for disabled people is a big one, and just general understanding. Again, I think more voices of just, you've got to communicate with how young people communicate. So using the social media, using all different things like that. But I think just being open and being like you have been today, being a bit more friendly, because I think young people are like, I don't know where to go. Or if I do try and contact the council, I don't get a very good response. Like, I remember we used to do it in school, because outside my school, outside of a special needs school, there was just a pavement that was too high for wheelchair users to get on. And eventually, after months and months of this one kid just saying it's not right, the council eventually did something. But I think having an easier channel of communication where we know exactly, instead of emailing, I mean, email's still a thing, but I think young people communicate better with something like, there's a direct website you could go on where we could contact you with issues. Bit like, in school when they'd say, oh, what you want, or like a wish box kind of thing. If people could just put their wishes on like a website and you go, and maybe people could vote on them, and then you can see, oh, that people really like that. We'll do that first. Or that's not a big thing, and then you could have a separate website for smaller issues in people's communities. But I mean like an overall website where people put in their things. Anyway, have you got anything to add, Caprice?
I have, well, one of the bigger issues for me is, especially around Manchester, there's a lot of road work, but there's no, there's the pedestrian, they say, oh, go in this path, it's not accessible. I have to go in the bike lane, and I get yelled at by bikers, which isn't very nice. They're not very friendly. But I feel like when construction is made in town or around town, disabled people are not considered, or people who can't walk, or even, parents with prams and things. It's just not considered, and I don't know how to voice that at all.
Well, I tell you what, one or two things. I'll take it away. So we do some building control, equality, kind of impact assessments, etc., etc. I'm not an expert in the arena, but I could take that particular question away in relation to that and come back to you with, this is what the council should do, and then there's a bit of debate as to how that's enforced, and etc., etc. So that's a really important point for us. And again, it's the benefit of coming and having a conversation. That wasn't something in my mind. But yeah, I can take that away. I can speak to somebody about what is it we do in those circumstances.
Thank you. I think that's all we've got time for. I think we might have even kept you a little bit longer, but we appreciate you staying. But thank you so much, Sean, for speaking to us and coming in and spending some time. And we know you're a busy man.
Brilliant. Really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thanks to everyone who took part in this episode. A massive thank you to Sean for the interview. And a big thank you to the Changemakers for providing the questions. We're looking forward to bringing you more episodes. If you have any send opportunities or services you'd like us to cover, don't be afraid to get in touch. Follow us at MCR Local Offer Podcast on Instagram. Or if you want to be involved, email us at localoffer@digitaladvantage.org.uk.